I'm Sam and I'm an agricultural scientist. Thinking about the future of agriculture takes up an inordinate amount of my time and I love talking about it. AI, genetics, new production techniques, sustainability, there's so many incredible things happening that it's really hard to keep up. I thought I'd share a recent interview panel that I held at our conference in Brisbane. Lucky enough to sit down with Emily Rigby, Habraken, Nial, Blair and Paul Gauthier, some of the highest regarded thought leaders in the space, to pick their brains about what the future of farming looks like and how it's going to impact the rest of us. Enjoy. I'm Sam. I'm the Executive Officer of Protected Cropping Australia and I'm really excited to host this panel. It's something that I'm very passionate about and it's something that I think about often, and I think with the expertise we have on stage, we've got a really great conversation coming forward, and it's pretty exciting to have some of these minds available to us to ask questions. So I'm very selfishly going to ask all the questions and you guys can ask some at the end, but I'm going to take most of them. I just quickly wanted to run through the reason why we sort of chose the four people we have on stage, or three people in an empty chair we have on stage. So Emily is obviously one of the PCA board directors, but she's got a really great mind around new crops, new crop types, new developments, as well as new industries, so nutraceuticals, medicals, all those sorts of new and emerging crops that we have coming through, and there's such a great opportunity to develop those, and I think they can be a really great benefit for the Australian protected cropping industry. We have Paul with his vertical farming expertise, automation, emerging technologies, as well as his education background and teaching the new generation of agriculturalists coming through. And I'm really looking forward to him showing up so that we can pick his brains a little bit further. Nial has graciously come on at the last minute to enlighten us on his circular economy, sustainability, and as well as his legislation brain. So that's something that we often miss in these conversations around the future is how do we actually enable it from a governmental level and what's required to get these changes over the line. And Ton, all the way from Europe, come down to educate us on how to use our glasshouses in a more effective way through the plant empowerment workshop we had the other day, but also really interested in learning about the international experience around the future of farming, as well as automation and practically how do we implement some of these new and emerging techniques. So that's the reason why we've chosen, and I'm stalling for time to see if Paul's going to show up, but we might just kick on. So the world is moving really, really quickly, and I think between ChatGPT and all the other AI technologies that come out, it would be impossible to have a conversation like this without the use of AI and trying to implement those AI solutions into an agricultural system is really where we're seeing some challenges at the moment. I recently heard an interview with an AI developer who said that he was afraid to go to sleep because by the time he woke up in the morning, there were 5 new software developments that he'd had to get up to speed on. So with that in mind, AI is going to change the world, and how do we incorporate those new technologies into protected cropping? Now, this is probably an unfair question to Ton because he is not an AI expert, but with your experience on how to implement, the plant empowerment techniques and automating our greenhouses, how do you see the AI question for horticulture, and what are the key challenges that you're seeing?
Well, first, before you can start developing AI, you have to get data which is reliable, data which is reliable for the whole greenhouse. And once you have this data available, then you can start developing algorithms which can look at a little bit of the history of the data, but most of the algorithms will be self-learning, so they can improve themselves while doing the job. So you will see more and more that there will be algorithms, artificial intelligence, used to basically help the grower to control the climate which is needed for growing a good crop. And this artificial intelligence in the end will help the grower to prevent making mistakes, and that will also help the grower to control larger surfaces. Instead of having a grower per, let's say, 5 hectare, one grower can do 20 hectares without making huge mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that being able to do more with less is the experience around AI, particularly what we're seeing at the moment is an AI system on its own isn't as effective as an AI and a person working together. And I think that's a real great opportunity that we're seeing. Can you touch on just quickly about the Wageningen automated greenhouse challenges that have been taking off over the recent years? Because I think that's a really interesting aspect of where we're taking these technologies.
Yeah, so there have been 3 challenges, and basically there were 6 compartments at Wageningen University Research Center in Bleiswijk. 5 of the compartments were controlled by teams from all over the world. And 1 of the compartments was controlled by a grower group, so experienced growers from the Netherlands. They were in control of this 1 compartment as a reference. Before the groups in the 5 compartments could start, they had to take part of a hackathon, so there were more teams subscribing to participate, but they had to develop already in 48 hours a base algorithm and base ID how to control the greenhouse compartment, and out of these, let's say 10, 15 teams, 5 were chosen to really execute it during a certain amount of time. The first year was growing cucumber, second year was growing tomato, and the third year of the challenge was lettuce on a moving gully system. So yeah, teams supported by Microsoft, teams supported by universities all over the world, teams supported by commercial suppliers. They were competing to, in the end, get the best result, and they were judged on several parameters, one being production, but also how much energy are you using to reach this production, and how close is your solution to practice? How can it be used now already for growers in practice? So they were judged on different how we call it, subjects, and in the end, if you were the best on average, you were the winner of the challenge.
Yeah, I just find it incredible that you can have a group of greenhouse controllers from all over the world controlling an actual system and implementing it and seeing the growth.
And those 5 teams, they were only able to enter the greenhouse before the crop started, so they could install the sensors which they needed, and that was the only time they were allowed in the greenhouse. So after the challenge started, they could not go in there anymore. They only got the feedback from crop registrations from the employees from Wageningen Research Center, and they got the data from the climate computer and from the sensor they installed, and based on that they had to control the growth of the cucumber for let's say 10-12 weeks, and the tomatoes for 16 weeks, etc. Yeah,
it's just incredible that some of these technologies that you think are in the future are actually, they're happening now and it's being implemented as we speak. Speaking of automation and all of the new world order of how we're producing our food, we've got Paul's finally arrived from his other speaking duties. Automation is obviously a big part of the vertical farming systems that we're seeing pop up around the world. Can you just talk a little bit about the vertical farming automation experience and what we've seen so far? And just touch briefly on the role that vertical farming will likely play in a global food chain, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so there is a lot of range of automation in vertical farming. A lot of them are not automated at all, and you have the fully automated one. AI, as you mentioned, have a big role to play into it in automation, mainly for logistic reasons. You have a lot of way of moving the trays or moving the different part of the vertical farm around, and so you need to use AI for that, understanding which part of the farm was giving a high yield or lower yield and how you could optimize it. We all understand in many parts in the field is the same way, where you will have one part of the field which will be a little bit wetter or have a different microclimate than the other one. We have the same thing in the vertical farm, believe it or not. And so it's important to use AI to do that, and automation is the only way to do that. Even so, it's crazy to just think of that, and I'm sure some farmer will laugh when they are, managing hectares and hectares of land, and the vertical farm is only just a few meters square. And but you need a lot of people to monitor everything on real time. And if you want to reduce labor, even so, you walk into a farm in multiple level, it still take a lot of time. All the crops will behave differently in a certain way. So you need to really use AI to really understand what's moving. In terms of automation, it comes from the seeding to the harvesting and almost the shipping at this point. We can imagine a future where crop will be seeded automatically and then be shipped with Amazon automated whatever, trucks directly to the store without any human touching it. I think that's the power that vertical farm bring, is removing a little bit the human part of it, but not that much, because you are switching from a very, I would say, cheap labor, technically speaking, to a very skilled labor. And so that's a big difference that vertical farming is bringing. So you will have 10, low pay farmers to replace with a very high pay engineers. So that's the kind of thing where vertical farming doesn't really compensate. But the level of automation that you are seeing is really, really moving into the part of getting into basically the robotization and the future of it. Not at the moment, nobody in vertical farm is using AI. They are using image processing, which is one part of AI, but there is no farm today that can tell my farm by itself is predicting what the crop is going to do. The main reason for it is we are missing in every automation and everything, first experience, and vertical farm don't share it in general. And the other thing that we are missing is, well, to get a good AI, you need a good model. Yeah. Right? And to get a good algorithm, you need to know your plants and do the measurements. And because the industry is kind of new in a certain way, we don't have that. And whatever we have in the field, when you talk about the models for crops or anything in the field, you talk about the amount of rain that you're going to get and the quality of the soil. As there is no rain, there is no quality of the soil. So suddenly you have to readjust that. So that's kind of the future going forward is pushing.
Yeah, and that just goes back to what Ton was saying around collecting the data. And I think the data is so important at this stage to inform the future algorithms that we're pulling together. One of the key aspects that is sort of limiting the development of vertical farming systems around the world is energy. And I'd like to just quickly flick to Nial around his experience with the sustainability and the sort of circular economy aspects of a future where protected cropping does play a much bigger role. We do know that protected cropping is sometimes energy intensive, sometimes CO2 intensive, and obviously inputs intensive too. So with your experience with circular economies and sustainability, where do you see a future with protected cropping?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's one that presents a lot of opportunities for protected cropping into areas that maybe have an abundance of leftover energy, heat, for example, CO2, and other byproducts that are going to be valuable inputs into protected cropping systems. So I think it's reimagining where we can actually have the footprint and grow food and fibre alongside other traditional industries where we previously have needed large areas of land and water, etc., to be able to that food and fibre. I think it reimagines that. It probably brings it a little bit closer to maybe some of the major labour force areas that we have as well. Traditionally, again, in regional communities, it has been harder, and I think that challenge will get harder with AI and other developments, because the one challenge that governments, for example, have to face with data and AI is the capacity that we have of the people that are going to be available, and we're actually going to be pitching all of our industries against each other for that capability. We'll go back to those of us that have been in Hort and Ag for a while. We used to have to challenge the mining companies to pay our diesel mechanics to operate our pumping systems, for example. We're now going to see similar competition potentially for the same people that are there. We'll be competing against mining, accounting, a whole range of other parts of the economy for the skill sets that AI, etc., might be able to bring into play. So I think it's definitely got a lot of opportunities. I'd prefer to be in protected cropping, and that's why I'm in, for example, mushrooms moving into the future when it comes to looking at sustainability, because of the level of control that we might have over some of these things and the ability to be self-sufficient. Looking at our material flow analysis to see what byproducts we may be able to use and valorise and be able to then generate our own energy, our own substrate, our own growing mediums, or also add value into other areas, I think is going to be the exciting part. So in a nutshell, I think it provides huge opportunities: vertical farming, protected cropping, moving into the new areas of pharma and food as medicine, I think are all really exciting opportunities for the sector going forward.
Yeah, and the mushroom experience of that circular economy is a really interesting one, because you have the inputs of, mulch or green waste, which then gets turned into the growing media for the mushrooms, which then gets turned back into your growing media. So it's a really sort of a great example of what could be achieved through some collaborative approaches. And what we're talking about here is things like putting a glasshouse structure next to a paper mill, so the CO2 and the heat off from the paper mill becomes the inputs to the protected cropping. And we've seen some examples of that around the country. Shifting gears a little bit, we did touch on alternative crops and different types of crops grown under these structures. I'd just like to flick to Emily to talk a little bit about the renaissance that is happening in the new and emerging alternative medicine area.
Yeah, look, it's a really exciting space. A lot of you would be aware of medicinal cannabis, which the industry has been slow to get off its feet here in Australia, and that's not through a lack of trying. We definitely haven't had the government on our side, putting a lot of roadblocks and red tape in the way. But one of the most amazing things that the legalisation of medicinal cannabis, not just in Australia but around the world, has done is it's really opened our eyes to other medicines and other crops that may have been prohibited and forbidden. So I don't know if you're aware, but as of the 1st of July, just only a couple of weeks ago, we in Australia, in a world first, have allowed for the rescheduling of psilocybin from magic mushrooms and MDMA for treatment-resistant depression and treatment-resistant PTSD. So these are huge opportunities. One of the things that I really love about about cannabis as a medicine is originally, when this started to become popular as a pharmaceutical, so to speak, which it's not a traditional pharmaceutical. I still remember the first conference I went to in Israel as part of my Nuffield scholarship, and I met a couple of guys at the welcome function who said, what do you do? And I'm a grower from Australia, and I'm all excited, and they said, but what are we going to need you for? We're just going to synthesize it in a lab. And my heart I was like, what? No. But the beautiful thing is that cannabis, it doesn't work like that. When they tried to synthesize THC, they actually had some disastrous effects. When we've tried to isolate THC and CBD, it doesn't work as well. So we have this whole plant medicine that the pharmaceutical industry can't just isolate, synthesize, press into a nice little pill and pop that in a blister pack. It does make research and the development of that industry a lot more complicated. When it comes to psychedelic medicines, we're already starting to see there's a lot of trials happening at the moment in Australia for synthetic psilocybin. While that does work, we do have some really positive results, particularly in end-of-life anxiety trials. But we're also starting to see research coming out that the actual extract from the magic mushrooms works better because it's this entourage effect. So we're seeing new opportunities for growers, obviously in medicinal cannabis. It's been legal now in Australia for 7.5 years. We have just opened the door for psychedelic-assisted therapies, and there's a couple of magic mushroom growers in Australia already, but being a brand new industry, similar to cannabis, where we were, doctors aren't educated. We don't have many people, if any, actually legally allowed to prescribe. It is a heavily regulated industry, of course, but there's just so many new opportunities. And so what cannabis has done is it's really allowed us to think outside the box and explore other plant-based medicines. And I think that's a really great opportunity in protected cropping, not just for medicinal cannabis. We've got an adult use market just in Australia, just around the corner. We've got opportunities for nutraceuticals, for foods, for SANS. At the moment, we have an application to allow us to be able to consume cannabis greens. So imagine if on your dinner you're ordering a salmon or a steak and it came with cannabis microgreens or a few cannabis leaves in your salad. Nothing to get you high, but something that is actually has a very high nutritional value. So we're going to see that hopefully by the end of the year that we'll be allowed to consume. And if you think that's a little far-fetched, it was only in 2017 that Australia and New Zealand allowed us to consume hemp seeds and hemp oil. So these plants have been really demonised unnecessarily, and we're starting to see a lot more freedom for some of these more unique crops.
Yeah, and I was speaking with our friends from La Trobe University, who may or may not be in the audience, around their program with the Olivia Newton-John Foundation around developing plant-based cancer treatments. And that's just, then there's a whole suite of compounds that are being grown out there that we haven't, identified and trialled yet. And I think that's just such a massive market for us in an alternative, as you were saying, an alternative space that other than traditional crop types. Underpinning all of this and throughout what everyone said today was the need for people and skilled people. I don't know who to throw this curveball to, but the challenge of providing the industry, and we heard from Matt Plunkett this morning, with 10,000 new workers over the next 5-10 years, with a particular nuance of understanding the agronomy as well as the sort of technical how to grow skills. Are we going to be able to provide the 10,000 growers in this field, and how do we assist in getting those people in front of a glasshouse? I've got all the answers.
Yeah, well, I don't have all the answers, but one of the things that we need to do, and we do this at PCA, is about fostering the next generation. We do also need to be aware that the image of a farmer is not the same as it used to be. So there are so many different roles when it comes to being involved in growing. And one thing that cannabis did was and so does all the tech, is it makes farming sexy. Like all of a sudden, it's not just the image of a farmer on a tractor. It's so many different job roles. But I think investing in our people is obviously one of the really difficult areas for us here to hold them in, one, to attract them to begin with, to want to work in horticulture, but then to be able to attract them from these other data-driven industries is going to be difficult. AI's, and this technology is going to help us reduce some of the pressure, but we still need people. Nothing replaces the farmer walking through the crop, no matter how much technology you have.
And I think looking at protected cropping and the skilled growers that we need, if you change the way of looking at it, it can also be very sexy to work in horticulture, because we are very sustainable, very efficient, and we don't need necessarily growers. We need data analysts. We need management who understands how to combine data with practice. So it's not like Emily said, it's not a farmer on a tractor. It's really a high-tech job.
Is protected cropping a employer of choice in Holland?
It's getting more and more. Yeah. So people from who are studying in Wageningen University are more and more attracted to high-tech horticulture, because it's changing, because there's more need for those professionals. It's healthy. It's a healthy industry, so it has a good image, and therefore also more and more young guys are looking into it.
I will invite any questions to come down, because I'll take up all the time otherwise. So if you have any questions, run on to a microphone. But Ton?
Yeah, what I wanted to add on the first question you asked me about the Greenhouse Challenge, important one to add, 3 times a AI team won. So they outperformed the experienced growers who were also participating. And those were just teams, students combined with some external expertise. But they were controlling the greenhouse out of California or out of Japan. But those were all teams with young people.
Incredible.
Go. I just want to comment on a few things that have been said. I think a farmer on a tractor could be quite sexy, but I don't understand why.
Personal preference.
A tractor these days is of course also a huge
computer,
with a lot of electronics in it and with a lot of sexy.
One comment that I want to say, you mentioned, can we, train these people for the future? I don't think we have a choice. I think we need to train them, and I think some universities, I was in the industry before, I was at universities before, and I have seen the academic world really moving very slow into what the new technology could be. We talked about robotics and everything, but unfortunately, we needed the research to be done 10 years ago. And a lot of the things that I have seen around is I'm still seeing professors making research on lettuce in vertical farming and indoor farming. But I'm sorry, but if the vertical farming haven't figured out a way to grow lettuce indoor, we have a problem. And so that's the thing, we really need to look forward to the research that we will need to be done for the future. And unfortunately, again, this research should have been done before, and we should have trained the people. Vertical farming across the world or indoor farming is struggling at the moment because it's extremely difficult to find people to work in the industry. So again, we don't have a choice because it's about food and it's about our future and our survival as a human species. So we do have to do it.
I think it has to start at school. One thing that we've done, something that still continues that I kicked off when I was the minister in New South Wales, was educating the careers advisors. So bringing careers advisors from the schools to Sydney and collectively showcasing the opportunities that are available in ag and hort and primary industries. Because if we don't do that, the brightest talent of the future will continue to be told that they should be sitting in a bulk billing clinic as a GP and just, writing out scripts, rather than capturing the hearts and minds and saying, if you really want to change the world, if you want to feed an increasing population, if you want to address some of the lifestyle unfortunate habits that we have, then this industry is a way to actually make a difference. It's an industry that can provide the flexibility, an industry that is the future, has all the modern technologies. So we have to try and capture the hearts and minds sooner, and we actually have to take, the industry has to take those that are going to have the influence in our children, including the parents, along with the journey as well.
Yeah, and that's an important part. The parents have got to come along because, little Timmy comes home from school, says, I want to be a farmer, and parents, colour drains from their face. Jennifer, we had a question.
Just on the education, I just wonder about the balance between the cost of getting that education, which is not cheap, and the pay and that you're going to get if you do go into protected cropping or farming of any sort, because I feel like there's probably not a good balance.
The two
there
don't match.
Yeah.
Look, I can just say more broadly, primary industries, for every graduate that's coming out, I was at Charles Sturt University for a few years, there was at least 6 jobs available. So I think that's a good place to start, to say there are jobs available. There are plenty of people that are operating in a lot of the gig economy in most of our major cities at the moment with a degree and a huge HEX bill. So I agree that we need to look at the parity around pay, but I think we start at the graduate level and say you at least get a job here, because there are a lot of graduates that are coming out that are moving into areas that have nothing to do with the area that they studied in, because of this fixation, again, that we keep telling people to get ahead, you have to go to university, rather than potentially go through other pathways. And I think that's where I would start at least.
Yeah, and I think also remembering that a lot of agricultural courses are heavily subsidised. So I came out with a HEX bill that was half my friends who were studying highfalutin things. Did you want anything to add there?
Yeah, I think what is important to also consider is, the generations are different as well. And we need to seduce in a certain way to attract the student in some things alike. And that's why farming need to adapt to this situation, to change in a different world in the future, mainly for all the challenge we have mentioned, but also because the new generation wants something different, right? All our kids, or most of our kids, have computers, right? At 4 years old, they start on an iPad and they're probably better than we are. And so that's the kind of thing that we know the generation is moving toward a more technological world, and we need to provide that into farming and allowing them to do that and train them to make this work and this job attractive to them and adapted to their situation. Otherwise, they won't. You're right. I mean, it's difficult, and you know the salary and everything, as you mentioned, is difficult to make a living. Not in the vertical farming world. Most of the people have been attracted to it because it's a pretty good paid job. So that's the kind of thing that we need to adapt just the farming system to that.
Yeah, and one of the things we're hearing from an industry level is we need to tell the story more. And I think that goes to all of the different points that were made today, is that we in agriculture in general, but particularly protected cropping, have a really big challenge to try and tell the story and get our stories out there. It's all well and good to be sitting in a room of our peers and the people who are interested in it, but we need to open this up to everyone else. Yeah.
Up here, Sam. You can't see us.
Yes.
Sorry.
Graham.
Yeah, thank you. Graham Smith. I'd like to focus on one of the key themes of the conference, and a question for the panel is, up to now, pretty much we've been growing for kilos, and given the energy equation, that's not really the way to be going. It's not sustainable. So I'd like to put to you, how do we grow for profit? Because that's really what we should be doing as a horticultural business. Now, with AI, I believe the opportunities are endless in terms of weather prediction, measuring the plant. Is it actually getting benefit from the photons it's receiving now, or is it just wasted on it at this time? What is the energy price right now? What is the sell price in the shops now? All of that could be integrated into a system that'll drive the crop faster, slower, and to meet the logistics of that crop. So I'd like your views on how to grow for profits in farming for our future.
And this will be the last question, because we are eating into our lunchtime. So, but we could do this for hours.
That's a really great question, Graham. And for me, with my background as a research scientist, I'm always amazed at how so many farming operations and businesses in general don't actually look at all of the individual aspects of their business to work out how that is contributing to their profits. So why do you do a particular process? How long does it take to propagate or to harvest? Can you look at different fertilizers or different energy use? I really don't understand why we don't have research programs in every single business, and a lot of people do. But I also know, always having one foot in research and one foot in industry, it's quite difficult when you're operating a business commercially to actually take the time to do that research, to work out what, is that the best way to do it? Can you improve your profitability, or particularly reduce your labour costs or reduce your energy costs? Because these are the two killers in our industry. And it's definitely something I see in the cannabis industry a lot, which really disappoints me, is no one comes from a production horticulture background in cannabis, and or very, very few. And so it becomes an area where, not just in cannabis, but in other crops as well, that we're not looking at, well, if I add this level of technology, how is that going to reduce perhaps my labour costs somewhere? And then all of a sudden you can see that it's worthwhile investing in it, because you're then going to, that piece of technology is possibly going to pay itself off in a year or two, as opposed to paying salaries. You then also look at being able to reduce that or remove that human error as well. But it's definitely a challenge when we're operating businesses and we don't have time to do the research. But I encourage everybody here who's a grower or in any kind of business is actually have a look at all the areas where it's, where you're spending your money, and how can you be more efficient. And for those who say they don't have time, think of the R&D tax concession. And make sure that you utilise that to the full potential, because the government will assist you with that R&D tax concession for you to actually do some research to improve your profitability.
Yeah, and I know Paul's very passionate about this. One of your great quotes that I often repeat is bringing the farming back to vertical farming, and focusing on actually producing the crop is so important for profitability.
Yeah. I think profitability could be defined in many ways, and I do think that one aspect is to involve more research into it. I agree with you. I think, the energy that you mentioned, you're right, there is an energy cost, there is a lot of cost into it. Well, let's work on making it work, right? I think one of the things that farmers are amazing about is they take a piece of land, right, and they make it work, right? The only thing with the new technology that we have today is people are pointing finger at it, saying, oh, it's expensive, it doesn't work. Let's come back to what we're used to. But some people are actually trying to make it work, and let's make it work because we have to. And the only way to do that is through research and targeted research in this area. And many of the technology today haven't been focusing on the energy and how to reduce the cost, but we could do that. It's just through research and investment and going into it. And when the farmer don't necessarily have time to do the research, let's work with universities and institutes, and in Australia we're very good at it, and involve them into raising the problems that you are trying to target and you would like to target, and ask them to do the research, and the research will be done and we'll move forward to push the industry forward. So.
No, great thoughts to end on. Thanks for watching. I hope you got something out of it. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and if you've got any questions or things that you want to know, please sing out.